Thank you all for being here. I'd like to begin my remarks by framing the underlying conceptual issues that I'll be addressing this evening. In formulating a conceptual understanding of why the death penalty is both just and necessary, we must look backwards first and assess what ideas and traditions brought us to this moment. We are not mere blank slates, no matter what Rawls or other egalitarians assert. We are a product of a complex history, one informed by tradition and custom, but always mindful of necessary innovations in all realms of society. As such, we must give equal reverence to the ideas and beliefs of our predecessors, understanding that those ideas form the basis for the complex society that we now inherit. Because society is our inheritance, our role as legal practitioners, academics, scientists, pastors, artists is to examine the human condition with both prudence and caution. The attack on the death penalty is unwarranted, but it is part of a broader narrative in what the left views as the long arc of history bending toward justice. It emerges from an intellectual tradition of leveling, deconstructing, and subverting. Within this tradition, there's no desire to build, create, or grow a society, and consequently no desire for the future. There's no thought of preservation because preservation is itself an illiberal instinct. Preservation is a will to tradition, authority, and a long chain of responsibility and solidarity with both the past and the future. People in modernity have little conception of such things. We live for the present alone, and we cower at the mere mention of such responsibility. Everything that makes institutions what they are is scorned for the sake of a vague desire for freedom. This freedom entails little of what our forefathers understood that obscure word to mean. Freedom is not the absence of constraint, rather it is the embracing of it. It is the will to responsibility for oneself and others, and it takes a drastically different form historically than what we understand it to mean today. The leveling instinct here and elsewhere is concealed behind lies about human nature and morality, and from there my opponents derive their authority to undermine institutions crucial for the preservation of society. Bearing this framing in mind, we turn to the issue at hand. It has been repeatedly and recently reiterated that the Constitution allows for the death penalty, so I won't address that issue here. What concerns me is why we should have a death penalty at all. Obviously, the root issue at hand is justice, but justice is conceptually an abstraction. There is no tangible justice that we can point to, and it lacks a sort of definiteness needed to conduct empirical analysis of it. Consequently, it is a metaphysical concept and one that requires careful deliberation to critically understand and assess. Our notion of justice is roughly derived from the thought of the Socratic age of Greece. In Aristotle, we find the notion of proportional equality in justice. Aristotle postulated that for purposes of ethics and law, treating things as equal is an impossibility because everything differs to some degree. The inherent difference is visible in the context of punishment. Let us postulate that Draco, the famous Athenian tyrant, rewrote our legal system. Draco's laws prescribe the death penalty for all offenses, even the minor ones. We would rightly cry foul of these laws. How could our society justify the death penalty for trivial offenses? Reason prevents us from allowing such things because we inherently recognize that there is variation between crimes. As such, we implicitly recognize the necessity of a system of hierarchy within punishment. Under the concept of proportional justice, each offender is given his due. For lower offenses, lower punishment, and for greater offenses, greater punishment. To sum it up with a maxim of Cicero, let the punishment fit the crime. This is where our notion of justice comes from. Plato wrestles with the issue of just punishment frequently throughout his dialogues. In Protagoras, the sophist argues that just punishment has two aims in mind, either rehabilitation or retribution. Socrates and Protagoras highlight throughout the dialogue that retributive justice should be rare, but it is necessary for the sovereign to be able to command the authority to deprive violent offenders of their lives. Under this schema, we reserve the death penalty only for those who are beyond rehabilitation and have, by their actions, declared themselves an enemy of society. Plato is clear that the violent offender has made himself an enemy of the state by offending not just one individual, but the whole of society, and must be punished on these grounds. In the dialogues Gorgias and the Republic, Plato places emphasis on the fact that injustice is not only bad for the community, but for the offender himself. Under Plato's conceptualization, the individual who commits offenses is viewed as sick, and the punishment is cure. For the lower offenses, even up to some forms of violent offense, a punishment serves to rehabilitate and ultimately cure the disease. For the most violent offenses, there can only be one cure. Just as we would not ask a doctor to amputate for a cold, we would not expect the sovereign to dole out death sentences for every crime. However, when it is necessary, it must be done. Plato emphasizes that punishment is the natural consequence of wrong action, while infliction of suffering for no reason is no judgment at all. The natural consequences of offending the social order and the laws must follow. St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the greatest Catholic philosophers, wrote similarly, analogizing punishment with medicine. He wrote, "It is lawful to kill an evildoer insofar as it is directed to the welfare of the whole community, so that it belongs to him alone who has charge of the community's welfare. Thus, it belongs to a physician to cut off a decayed limb when he has been entrusted with the care of the health of the whole body. Enlightenment thinkers shared similar beliefs about the inherent justice of the death penalty. John Locke, for example, wrote in his second treatise of government that every man in the state of nature has the power to kill a murderer, both to deter others from doing the like injury, which no reparation can compensate, by the example of the punishment that attends from everybody, and also to secure men from the attempts of a criminal who, having renounced reason, the common rule and measure God hath given to mankind, hath by the unjust violence and slaughter he hath committed upon one declared war against all mankind, and therefore may be destroyed as a lion or a tiger, one of those wild savage beasts with whom men can have no society nor security. And upon this is grounded that great law of nature, whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. Perhaps this line of thinking is too harsh, barbaric, utilitarian, and remote for we moderns. We may assume that we've evolved past the necessity for the death penalty and that we've become better angels with no need for such a barbaric institution as punishment by death. I would counter with a brief example of a recent case, Glossop v. Gross, that the Supreme Court decided in 2015. After once again reaffirming the constitutionality of the death penalty, Justice Alito detailed the harrowing crimes of the 4 petitioners who moved to stay their executions. The first hired another man to beat his employer to death with a baseball bat, which he did. The second snapped his 9-month-old daughter's spine because she wouldn't stop crying while he was playing video games, and he continued to play video games after she died. The third killed a food prison supervisor by pulling her into a mop closet and stabbing her numerous times with a shank while already serving 130 years in prison. And finally, the last petitioner anally raped and murdered an 11-month-old girl, inflicting 2 skull fractures, internal brain injuries, 2 fractures to her jaw, a lacerated liver, and a bruised spleen and lungs to the innocent infant. Do these cases shock you? Good. They should. I don't think my opponents disagree that these acts were a product of purely senseless evil deserving of punishment of some kind. Where we depart from our opponents is we would say unequivocally, these offenders deserve to die for their crimes. Justice demands it. The families of the victims of these and similar crimes deserve to see the offender pay for his transgression. A just society requires that we be able to punish violent offenders with the harshest penalties. Mind you, our society and its excessive benevolence allows these individuals their day in court to prove their innocence or apply for a stay of execution. This is arguably far more than they deserve, but nevertheless, they, like all individuals in our society, are afforded due process rights. The state's responsibility here is to adequately adjudicate the claims against the defendant and unequivocally absolve him if the evidence does not tend to support guilt. But if convicted, the guilty party must be removed from society. Though rehabilitation and reformation may reach some violent offenders, it is the responsibility of the state to recognize that there are those among us who will never be fit to live in a peaceful society, and as such, they must be removed. My opponents, though well-intended, would allow the individuals who commit heinous acts to subsist on taxpayer dollars, not out of a sense of justice because justice requires these individuals to pay for their crimes, rather because the notion of the state depriving violent criminals of their lives offends their moral preference. On this basis, they would undermine this legitimate and just form of punishment. They would have us revert to a primitive form of social order where violence and chaos are the order of the day. It is part of an ongoing project to deconstruct, subvert, and replace the traditions on which our notions of justice are founded. We must recognize that absent the death penalty, the state loses its ability to truly punish violent offenders, deter and prevent crime, and the individuals harmed by the uncurable criminals among us will be unable to obtain a true form of justice. Further, I can assure you that the uncurable criminals will not disappear with a wholly egalitarian approach to punishment. They will continue to appear with each successive generation, and with each passing generation, the state will slowly lose its ability to deter them. If we give up this method of punishment and all its terrifying power, the cracks in the foundation of our notion of justice would give way under the weight. I'll close with a quote from Joseph de Maistre, a French philosopher of the late 18th century and early 19th century who wrote the following in his St. Petersburg Dialogues. He says, "All grandeur, all power, and all subordination to authority rests on the executioner. He is the horror and the bond of human association. Remove this incomprehensible agent from the world, and at that very moment, order gives way to chaos, thrones topple, and society disappears. Let this proclamation both warn us and guide us as we assess the merits of this proposition. I strongly urge a no vote." Thank you very much.